I'm just doing a video of this because I feel as though I'm carrying on a tradition. This is a box with lid made by my grandfather. I'm just about 70, and so this is was last altered 100 years ago. I'm approximating that, of course, so about 100 years ago. And as far as I can tell, from what I can see, what he did, I'm going to roll it over, I'll show you. He did not cut these dovetail joints. He was not a craftsman. If you look at the joints closely, you can still see the pencil marks made by the joiner who made a box with dovetail joints. What he did was to add these bits on with these screws to give it a top and a bottom, and he added the lid, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about the lid in a moment. And he put on these handles to make it into a useful box. I think, looking at the screws and the way it's done, he also put a plywood base into it. So I'll pause the video, but before I just take it over, I'll just show you these markings which he's filled in with putty or something on there, where another sort of handle has been. And if I look at the front, which I've sawn out, you can see similar markings. Four there, one in the middle, one above. So very specific markings where some sort of handle has been attached. And that was the front of the box. So what I did a few years ago, because of where it was, opening the lid was awkward, was cut the front out and just left enough meat on it to keep the dovetails on the front. So that was the front, and I never made it into a drop down or opening lid, so I can consider making the door. If you look at where those markings are, you'll see that 4 of the screws there and 2 there have gone all the way through, and so it might be there's some recesses there, but 1, 2, 3, 4 and those 2 have gone all the way through. So proper joiners will recognize the sort of fitting that would have had. So it was a box. Who knows what the top of the box was like with the handle front and back. Now let's look at the lid. So it's a thick piece of wood with rounded edges on 2 sides, but what you'll see is trimming bit there, no trimming bit there. So the top has been sawn out of something. Now when I say folk furniture, as I say, he was not a craftsman, and so as a young man with very limited tools, because see what he's got: saw, hammer, screwdriver, brace and bit. There's a recess in there. I don't think he probably had a chisel, because these hinges there are planted on and screwed in, and then he's just screwed the handles onto the side. So he's made a useful little cup chest and then varnished it. So the one thing that they did use was lots of filler and lots of varnish to restore furniture, as it were. So there we are, a folk box. And I'll show you later what I'm going to be using it for, to carry on its tradition as just a useful box made by one of my ancestors, as it were. And here's a record just to show, and who knows what it was before that, but a dovetailed, could have been a tea chest, a packing case. It's amazing. The reason I'm saying that is I'm amazed at the level they went to for single-use items. They might have been used for more than one. So it could have been used to transport something packed in straw a distance or another. So it could have been disposable. That's why he's been able to reuse it. Okay, there's the antique box, let's call it, made by my grandfather out of some sort of crate. And I think before I said it was, let's say, a craft made, to function. Maybe you can see, because I've seen his old wobbly saw, that the cut along the back isn't the straightest of cuts. If I get down, this is not a criticism, just to show what people did. And then the cut along the edge of this, what presumably was once a tabletop, isn't as straight as it might be, but still a cut. Therefore, that gives me the excuse not to make it to the highest standard of joinery, because it didn't start out like that. It just started out as a nice piece of wood. So that's the lid, printers inside. I'll turn it off now. Open the front, put the paper tray in, load it with paper, and what I'll do is I'll just turn the printer off now. There's a hole in the back, and then when I finish printing, just close it up. And the great thing was, look, it only just fits. How amazing is that? If this box was a fraction smaller, it would not have gone in, either width-wise or distance front to back, because of the need to leave space for the cables. So it's just a fit. And that's the only other thing I had to do was drill and tap out a bit of the handle, because even with spacers on the back of those screws, there wasn't enough meat left on the front to get the screw in to hold the handle. There we go. That's it. Just a little bit of social history, vaguely linked to this box. My grandfather grew up on a farm, a place called Hartshead. If you ever go along the M62 and see Hartshead Moor Services, that's the approximate location of the farm. And he was the second or third brother, can't remember. One of the aspects of the farm that he had responsibility for, I believe, was the potato round. That was his little thing as growing up. He was kept at home during the First World War because he was an essential worker producing food. When his father died or gave up, my great-grandfather, then the eldest brother inherited the farm, and my grandfather wasn't very keen on working for his brother, and so he went off to be a stockman for another farmer somewhere towards Robert Town. Now, they fell out with that farmer at some point, by which time now he had a wife and two children, my mother and my aunt. The problem was the house they were living in was a tied house, and the farmer said to him that, because they'd fallen out, well, I'm going to be out of the house by the end of the week then, which meant they went into rooms in Wakefield. This was the time of the Depression, which explains a little bit why people used what skills they had to make do with what they could get hold of. Although I'm doing tenuous link here, which is why reuse and recycle might well have been very popular then. And so this box, whatever it was originally used for, was repurposed as some other sort of thing, given a lid and given some trim around it. The front door is something I've added, so it was given a lid, and that lid looks like it might have come from cut out of the corner of a table, because that's an original curved edge and that's the end, but you can see that that's been sawn off there and the back's been sawn off down there. Now, he worked on the roads as a navvy at one point, did various jobs, whatever jobs he could find to try and keep food on the table for his wife and 2 children, and then later managed to build a business in the fish trade. But there's that bit of social history and why this box, as it were, with lots of dints in it, lots of fillings, cup ring marks on the top, stains that it's gathered over the years, is just an interesting object which I've rescued from the skip. You see these things, well, no, you don't see these things. It's unique, isn't it? No particular value, you know, but of value only because it's something that's been linked to my family for 100 years or so, since my grandfather made it out of whatever packing crate it was. You can roughly see the size. It had a handle of some sort, front and back, and it was a packing crate before he repurposed it as something which was a bit more like a piece of furniture. Anyway, there we go. That's the very, very brief social history of it, linking back to the First World War, the fact that a lot of people were farmers before the First World War, but the farm couldn't even sustain my great uncle. It's now a stud farm for specialist Shire horses, which, you know, is one way. But farms can't sustain full families and can't be split up. And so a lot of people moved from farming to other things as the generations progressed, and that's happened on both sides of my family. Anyway, there we go. So there we have it, a box which now, and you'll see a video of how I've done this, functions as something for me to keep my printer in alongside the computer, so that, well, just keep, basically the reason I wanted to do it was to keep the dust off the printer, but others feel that it is more appropriate if you've got your computer in your living room, so you keep things tidy. The other thing I did completely not from scratch, because I had the louvered door, was to box up the sockets and wires so that the magnetic catch on that needs adjusting. You can still see the wires coming down, but it's a bit tidier.